and welcome to another edition of the 66 to 87 podcast. I'm Tom Reed, joined as always by Dave Molinari, and we are going to ring out 2021 in the best possible way. We have a special interview coming up a little bit later with the legendary Mike Lange, talking about his career, his love for the Blues, Sidney Crosby, some statue of a mosquito in Manitoba that he and Dave are going to talk about. It's really enjoyable. I hope you stick around. It's great stuff. So please stick around to the third segment and listen to that. But Dave, we do finally have some hockey to talk about. I mean, we took a break last week for the Christmas holiday cheer here at DK Pittsburgh Sports. We didn't have podcasts. We didn't miss a game. Obviously, because of the COVID situation, everyone knows that the Penguins have missed 5 games. There have been 80 games around the league so far that have been postponed as this Omicron variant has come through and just wreaked havoc with the schedule, with rosters. Hopefully, we can start to get back to a little bit of normalcy. Right now, as we speak, the game for Sunday against the Sharks is on. So hopefully that will be good. The other good news, Dave, I think, is that the delay, while it certainly stinks to not have hockey, it's given some guys who have been injured some chances to get back. And I think mainly of, obviously, Malkin, who's getting very close. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a second. Bryan Rust and Jake Guentzel. So when we get going with hockey again, those guys, that's 5 more games they're likely to be able to play as the season goes on.
Yeah, I mean, that's half of your top 6 forwards, so that's pretty significant. Rust and Guentzel at least certainly seem like they could be back as early as Sunday, and the Penguins will need them, considering that they are now starting to lose guys on a regular basis because of COVID. They had fared pretty well before the Christmas break in that regard, but they've really gotten hit pretty hard during the past week. So getting some guys back, will be a very good thing for them, especially guys of that caliber.
Yeah, and it goes without saying, this is going on throughout the league. It's going on throughout the world right now with the Omicron variant. The only, I guess, good news, if there is such a thing with that, is while it's very highly contagious, it doesn't seem to be as serious, at least for those who have been vaccinated and had their boosters. So hopefully everyone can stay safe and get back into the arena and get back playing. Dave, as we record this, as we talked about, Geno Malkin is kind of back. He's been practicing, getting closer and closer. Finally met with the media on Wednesday. Seemed to be in a very good mood. Talked about wanting to play 3 or 4 more years. And I thought it was interesting. One of his comments, and again, you don't want to read too much into this right now because we don't know where this is going to go with him. But they were asking about, have you thought about your future contracts or contract negotiations? And he says, look, I'm rich. I'm already rich. And talking about how much he kind of likes this team and everything. Sounded to me like maybe he is going to be a little bit more amenable to taking a hometown discount if we get that far. Did you hear that in him, or just your thoughts of what he had to say on Wednesday?
Well, I mean, I agree with him. I think he's probably made more money than he will burn through anytime soon. And even a significant pay cut in his next contract, if he would take one, would still leave him, making a pretty handsome salary. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's conceivable that he would, at least consider doing that. He does seem to have developed a genuine affection for the area and of course for the franchise in the time he's been here. Obviously it's the only team in the NHL with which he's ever been associated. his agent probably winced a little when he heard that Malkin even, broached the possibility of a possibly accepting a lower salary. But you know, there's a lot of negotiating to be done, I think, between now and whenever or wherever he signs his next contract. But that does kind of bode well for the people who would like to see him stay here. Now, how high a level he could play at in future seasons, remains to be seen. We still don't know yet how he will play in the wake of this major knee surgery that he had during the off season. So, and I think the Penguins will probably want to see how he performs, how he holds up before they make any significant decision about what role he might play in the future of the franchise.
I could see him, Dave. Maybe we've seen toward the end of his career with a guy like Joe Thornton. Now Thornton has bounced around a little bit, but I could see Malkin maybe if he wanting to stay and working it out, maybe taking a shorter term, even though the thought is to get to 3 or 4 years. Maybe he takes 2 years with the kind of understanding this is the only place I'm going to play, and then just maybe go a year or two to give the Penguins some cost certainty, and then at the same time allow him to continue to play with the franchise he loves.
Yeah, and I mean, I suspect that he has enough faith in Mario Lemieux, who obviously is no longer a primary owner, but who I think will still be kind of the face of the franchise, to the players. That if Lemieux would give him some assurance that the Penguins would at least entertain the idea of keeping him around after a short-term deal would expire, that that might be enough to get him to agree to say a 2-year contract. Obviously, this is all speculative on our parts, but I could see that working out.
Yeah, and he also obviously has a strong advocate in in '87 too. His good friend Sidney Crosby. So I could definitely see that working out. But like we said, we'll see where this goes. I do think he and there's always a little hyperbole when guys say, "I feel my knee feels 200% better." But I do remember watching at the end of the last season when he came back and got hurt in that Boston game. He played pretty well in the playoffs, but it was clear he wasn't 100%. You're hoping after taking 6 months off that that knee is pretty strong, and it'll probably take him a little while in playing in games to build up a little bit of trust, and of course, obviously get his timing back. But I think we'll get a fairly decent version of Malkin, albeit at age 35 or 36, or I don't know when his birthday is. But I think I would think he would be fairly healthy for this stretch run.
He has certainly looked good in practices. Now, you don't face the kind of rigorous checking in a practice that you do when you're playing an opponent. You're not being physically tested the way you are in games. But I think, for the past several weeks, actually, he has looked in practices, whether they've been with the team or in individual workouts with other injured players or just skills coach Ty Hannes. Uh, he has looked fine. Skating well, shooting well, doing everything you would expect of him. So I think there's reason, for optimism about what he can contribute for the remainder of this season. As we don't have access to his medical information. Not that we would understand it even if we did. But I mean, that will be the ultimate determining factor, I think, for what he's able to do and when he's able to do it. But from a layman's perspective, I really do like what I've seen from him.
All right. When we come back, we're going to kind of take a look back at the entire year of 2021 in its totality, but also please, as I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, please stick around. We've got a great interview with Mike Lange coming up a little bit later in the show. So stick with us here on the 66 to 87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66 to 87 podcast, and as promised, in a little while, we are going to be joined by legendary broadcaster Mike Lange in a pre-recorded interview. Fans are really going to like it. Some hockey, some non-hockey stuff. Really, just always treasure time you get to spend in talking with Mike Lange. But right now, Dave, let's look back at 2021, and I don't just mean the start of this season. Which has obviously gone very well, and just, let's be honest, better than expected with all the guys out. But just the whole year, it has been a year of some highs, a division title, some lows, a first-round flameout where the goaltender really struggled. We've had an ownership change. We've had the two stars of the team miss the beginning of the 21-22 season. A lot has gone on here. So we're going to throw out a few questions, and let's go bat them back and forth when we look at 2021 in its totality. Let's start with just this. What is the biggest storyline of this year for you? When you look at this whole year, what's the biggest storyline that people will remember this by?
Well, the one that will certainly have the most long-term significance, I think, will be the sale of the franchise, because I think that being purchased by the Fenway Sports Group pretty much guarantees that the Penguins will continue to be operated the way they have been for most of the past couple of decades, where they are willing to spend to the salary cap ceiling, and they have all the money they need to be competitive. And that might not have generated the most spectacular headlines of 2021, but in terms of long-term impact, that would certainly be my choice.
Yeah, and there's, I think a lot of people would agree with you, and I think this. I think there's some people. Change always scares people, um, but I think the Rooney family model going forward is going to change. I think you're going to see more and more of these sports conglomerates as it takes more and more money to run these franchises. I think it's going to become more the norm. I think you're going to see these big conglomerates starting to buy up other franchises. So I think before long, over the next 10 years, it would not surprise me to see this become very much the trend in all of pro sports in North America. We'll see how this goes. For me, I'll change it up a little bit. For me, the storyline, this is still a very good regular season hockey team. I mean, I think 2 years ago, going into the season, that there was questions there if this was maybe a borderline playoff team in the shortened 21 season. And then, of course, this year we all know that this was a team that people thought was a borderline playoff team again this year, especially with the injuries. But with its coach, and we talked about this last week, it's Mike Sullivan and the leadership group at the top. This team continues to show that it can make the playoffs. And as we know, if you can get in, you never know what's going to happen. We saw it with Montreal last year. I think Dave and I agree that maybe the window on this group is kind of closing rapidly. Some may say it's already closed, but the fact that this team continues to make the playoffs is a tribute to the leadership group, the coaches, and the management that runs this team. I think it's been really interesting and really something to behold with this franchise. Moving on, most talked about player of the year. I'm not saying the best player, controversial player. To you, Dave, who has been the guy that's been most talked about by fans and media alike this year?
Well, I think it's the guy who has been both the best and worst player at various times in the past 12 months. That would be Tristan Jarry,
Yeah.
who was outstanding for a large portion of last season, and then was the obvious culprit for their first round playoff loss to the Islanders, after which the public was divided about his future. Some people thought he should be traded. Others thought he should be drawn and quartered in Market Square. But he has rebounded from that and has been probably the biggest factor in the success that they've had through the first 3 months of this regular season, and is a big part of the reason that they're looking very much like a team that will again get into the playoffs despite the incredible adversity that they've faced, primarily through injuries to key players to this point of the season.
Yeah, 100%, Dave. One of the guys that we're hoping to have on the show here in the next couple weeks, and really to discuss Tristan Jarry and what it's like to be a young goalie who kind of flames out in his first playoff, it bounces back, is Mike Richter. We've been in contact with Mike. Hopefully, Mike Richter will join us for longtime Penguins fans that remember the 92 Cup, where the Rangers were kind of in control of that series at 2-1 with no Mario Lemieux. Richter gives up the horrible center ice goal to Ron Francis, and they go on and win. And that there were some people in New York wondering, this guy, how could he possibly recover from this? Well, he ends up winning the Stanley Cup 2 years later, one of the best American goalies. So it happens, and Tristan Jarry's hoping that he's kind of writing a similar story. All right, biggest newsmaker of the year. For me, I'll go first because Dave's already touched on this. To me, it's John Henry and the Fenway Sports Group. I mean, again, as Dave mentioned, what a story. I think one of the things that makes me feel good if I were a Penguin fan is the success that they have had in winning titles with his two other franchises, the Boston Red Sox, that have won, I've lost track, like 4 or 5 World Series for a team that couldn't win a title for about 80 years. And then Liverpool in the English Premier League, breaking through and winning a title, winning a Champions League title. So they have had a good string of success at Fenway Sports Group. And I think it bodes well for the future of this franchise. Dave, for you, who's the biggest newsmaker of 2021?
Well, as usually with the Penguins, there's no shortage of candidates. But when you consider the ripple effects that were generated by this individual and what he did, I would go with Jim Rutherford and his resignation in late January that obviously spawned changes, high up the food chain with Ron Hextall and Brian Burke coming in. That was a major shock to the system for that organization. So, and the aftershocks of that will continue to rumble through for quite a few years, I believe. So, I would give the nod to him, but as I mentioned, there's never any shortage of candidates for that distinction with the Penguins.
Here's an interesting one. Player of the year. Again, we're going 2021, not just a season. And I think in most years, it would probably be 1 or 2 people. It would be Sidney Crosby or it would be Evgeni Malkin. Malkin has not played in this season. Crosby came in late this season. Obviously had a good season last year. But I'm interested, Dave. Could your pick be someone not one of those 2 players?
As a matter of fact, it could be. And I would go with Jake Guentzel, who I think has established himself as one of the best goal scorers in the game. Was on quite a roll right before he got a broken knuckle blocking a shot in Seattle on December 6th. He had 7 goals in 4 games when he left the lineup. And as I say, he has just established himself as one of the top goal scorers in the game, one of the most reliable, and the something that's might get overlooked about him is he's not just a one-dimensional guy. He's a pretty good two-way player. His goal scoring is always going to generate the headlines, I think, but he's a guy that I would trust in just about any situation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's the pick, and I think it's interesting in going forward. Obviously, the two men that we mentioned earlier are always going to be the co-faces of the franchise, with Crosby leading the way. But let's be honest, they're young, or they're not young anymore. Guentzel seems to be the guy that, as this team moves along in the next 2, 3, 4 years, would seem to be the guy that would be really be the top goal scorer, that top player that you need as through a transitionary period for them. And I like the thing I've liked about Guentzel is always, not only is he quick, a good player, but he seems to even be more around the net this year, running into goalies. I mean, that's not necessarily his game, but for a guy who's not very big, has shown the willingness to go to the net. We see him tip a lot of pucks, getting in the crease. I think his game is evolving, and that is a really good sign for this franchise. All right, when we come back, as promised, we will be joined by the one and only Mike Lange for a pre-recorded interview. Please stick with us here on the 66 to 87 podcast. Welcome back to the 66 to 87 podcast. And as promised, joined by the legendary Mike Lange, just one of the great broadcasters in any sport. And as Penguins fans, just delighted to have this guy on radio and television for so many years. As with our own Dave Molinari, a Hockey Hall of Famer, and rightly so. Mike, how are you doing, and how are you enjoying retirement so far?
Well, we're doing pretty well.
Enjoying it.
You know, I kind of made the decision that 50 years in the broadcasting business and hockey was enough for me. Carrying those bags for all those years. In the early days, just so you know, there were no wheels for bags. You carried everything. So it was, as you guys are well aware with your travels even today. But I just thought it was time to step aside, let some of the young folks come in and take a chance at making a name for themselves, and enjoyed every minute that I put in the broadcast booth, and the response, especially from Pittsburgh and wherever I was, really, in Phoenix and in San Diego before I came to Pittsburgh. So it was a fun run.
Mikey, are you telling us that you were broadcasting before the wheel was invented?
It almost seems like that, David. It does. But, it's interesting because, I grew up in the era just after the great ones were really in the field of radio. And you have to understand, when I came to Pittsburgh, our games were radio only. I know that's hard to believe, radio only in the 70s. However, when I came to Pittsburgh, we were on KDKA radio, which was one of, I think, 13 50,000 watt clear channel stations, which means nobody's on that frequency. So KDKA goes to 38 states and to Canada. And so in the heyday, that was a major, this was a top 10 market, the city of Pittsburgh. One time, I think even got down to 9 as far as the television broadcast business. But for me, it was a major step up, an opportunity to be a part of something great. And we had some great people here. And so that's how it started for me. And it just gave me, once I got a little confidence and going, that ability to kind of roll with it. And I put my dues in and fortunately realized that I'd accomplished enough in 4 years. Once I got here, I was a little nervous, but it came very rapidly that I was doing basically the same thing, but just a different place and with a little bit more of attention. So that's where it all kind of started. And of course, when Davey came in, just about that time, the satellite was invented, and that kind of changed the scope of everything. And they went to a lot of television games. And what we ended up doing, we used to broadcast, I think, six TV games a year prior to the satellite coming, is that we started simulcasting. Now, I had done simulcasting in the minor leagues in Phoenix and San Diego, and we implemented it here and work with it. And so for years, because everything was on landlines for a lot of it, but we were still able to match them up. It got a little tougher with as many satellites that were up there to continue that. But so we were able to do it. And with KDKA, this was a pretty powerful television market and radio market for the NHL.
Mike, you mentioned great broadcasters. Was there one or two play-by-play guys that you particularly enjoyed listening to?
Well, the guy that kind of growing up had probably the biggest influence on my life is a gentleman by the name of Bill King. Bill King was the announcer for the San Francisco Warriors in the NBA and also for the Oakland Raiders. So I became very attached to those two teams and the San Francisco Giants with Lon Simmons as a broadcaster. And also Vince Scully was, of course, in baseball. But those guys had some big influences on me. And Bill King was more of what I became, I think, as a style. More of a rapid type of guy with quick little quirks. And he used to use a phrase, Davey, when something big happened, and he was an amazing guy. He just said, "Holy Toledo." And that just sent chills down my spine as a kid when I would hear him, and even in the early years of college. And I said, if I ever get in this business, if I can do it, I'm going to have some of my own. And lo and behold, my first job was in Phoenix, and I worked with a gentleman there who became my mentor, Al McCoy. And Al McCoy is the longest tenured NBA announcer in the history of the game, still doing games for the Phoenix Suns at 88 years of age. And he was my mentor, and he used a couple of phrases there. So I was in the right place there. Went to San Diego for 1 year, hoping to go in the National Hockey League and baseball. But we got wavered away by the WHA, and I had to scramble and find a job, and I ended up coming to Pittsburgh. And I think the rest is pretty obvious. I mean, I think the guy upstairs had something to do with where I went, because there are many, many crazy guys here that use phrases. Rosie Rosewell, Bob Prince, Myron Cope. I mean, the list is a mile long. And it was as to say, listen, I know where I'm going to send you. You're going to go to Pittsburgh, PA.
Mike, that provides a great segue into my next question for you. Obviously, everyone loved your sayings, and sometimes the style and flair you brought to your broadcast. But I think what a lot of hockey fans appreciated was your anticipation, almost like a player. I mean, in listening to your broadcasts, especially on the radio when we didn't get to see it, you seem to anticipate something happen. I can remember so many times where you would be saying, "Oh, you dancing out there on the ice." Sorry, I'm doing your imitation here. But you could just sense that something was coming. And sure enough, about 30 seconds or 45 seconds later, whether good or bad, it happened. How did that come about with you?
Well, I think it's experience more than anything, Tom. And I think it's applicable to every facet of life. You as a writer, as a broadcaster or anything, to be successful and really be good at something, you have to learn to anticipate. And once you do that, it just kind of comes to you much more easier than kind of fighting it to try and learn and try and go on. So I think that everybody has that capability, and everybody does use that a lot in their daily chores or whatever work that they're involved in. It just comes with experience and maybe the want to be better. But when you see as many games as I've seen or had seen, you certainly start to get feel for situations. And there's nothing better when it happens, when you kind of feel it. And so they've been going here. They've been going the last minute and a half. There they go, and to have it happen, it's a good feeling inside too. And it makes the color guy go, wow, how'd you know that? But it's all part of the package. And I've been blessed to be able to do a lot of that at times. I've been wrong sometimes.
Oh, that's hard to believe, Mikey. You broadcast games from dozens of cities, including some that don't have franchises anymore.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite road city? And if so, why?
Well, I think that my favorite road city, there's so many of them, Davey. I mean, I'm into the blues music, and you know that. And so I didn't get it back until the early 90s. But there are a lot of places in Canada that really shocked me, of all the blues places that they had. So, I mean, favorite cities, I had a lot of them. Certainly Chicago would stand out right there as far as what I love to see. Great hockey, great building, and great blues. So those are, little notes that from a selfish standpoint, I personally enjoy going there. From broadcasting, there was nothing like the old Garden in Boston. I mean, working it right down next to the ice and in a perfect position. Although every single night you worked, you came back to the hotel drenched in beer, and not by excuse me, by design, but it's the way the seats were set up. The people had no place to put their drinks, so they would put them down to their feet, and then the game would get going. They get excited and they kick the beers over, and it would all leak down into our booth on your back. So I learned very quickly in the Garden, leave your suit jacket in the press room, and when it's all done, then go back and pick it up, because it was soaked so many nights in that building. So that was, location wise, you could hear the players talking and yelling at each other, and that's real intimate, and it's and you're able to call the game at a pretty good pace. As far as comfort's concerned, that Atlanta building, the new Phillips building, was luxurious to sit in and work, and the sound system, I really enjoyed that. That and I would say the Rose Bowl. I did soccer too. I had a chance to work a game there, a playoff game, in what they called the NBC booth for the Rose Bowl, and that view and everything involved in it was as beautiful as anything I've ever seen in a broadcast situation, and it was so enjoyable to do. So those are some of the highlights. All the old buildings, of course, all have their particular moments and what they offered. It made me think, Davey, because I'm going to do a little piece here for the radio network about the old buildings and very quickly, what stands out to me. And I was thinking about, okay, Maple Leaf Gardens. Well, almost impossible to get to the radio broadcast booth in the old days. You had to walk up through the stands all the way to the top. Then you had to climb a ladder up to the next level with your bag, put it over the edge, and then walk a catwalk down into another booth where me and Foster Hewitt, in my early days, did some games, his son there. So that was interesting. But what I remember too about Toronto, and particularly Montreal, is I want to say airline stewardesses. And Davey knows what I'm talking about. They had the most beautiful usherettes in both of those cities you could ever imagine. And they were dressed to the T in outfits that resemble the highest class stewardesses that you'd ever see, in the color of blue, and in the Canadians with red, white, and blue. And guys, people would just watch this. All these people would just be geared in on the beauty of the women of that era. And so I do remember that. I don't know if Davey does, what you would see in those buildings.
Mikey, you touched on some places where you like to work games. What's the worst broadcast location you can remember?
Davey, I remember that when the New York Islanders, the old Nassau, was first built, and we used to work downstairs, and they told everybody they were going to have to go upstairs. Now, we actually work radio across from where it was now. I mean, you're familiar with it, all the way to the top, which is not too bad, actually, a thing. But then we moaned and cried to go to that level, which is a nice level now to work at. You know what I mean? Comparatively to other buildings. But I would think the Hartford building probably takes the cake as far as tough place to work. That was in the rafters in the early 80s, and it stayed until they left. Almost an impossibility to get up there and get in, just as tight as can be. That was some tough times doing games and being able to see through all the things that they had, the walkways and everything to try and call the game. That was a challenge, but we got through it.
Mike, obviously you were around for all 5 of the cup winning teams here. Was there a player during your tenure as a broadcaster who you wish could have gotten a Stanley Cup ring but didn't?
Boy, Davey, I thought about that, and I don't know off the top of my head if there's anybody that really stood out to me that didn't get a ring. And that's not fair because I haven't had a chance to look at the rosters, and I probably could give you an answer, or one or two players. But there were certainly guys that contributed mightily to the Penguins winning cups that did not get a ring because I didn't qualify the number of games played for the year, or, in the playoffs. If you play one game in the finals, you're in. But I do think that when I look back at the rosters, when the guys that are on the cup, I mean, just when you look and see that, and you look at every guy and you start thinking about his contribution to the team, and there's so many guys, but all of them did in some way, shape, or form contributed to them winning the cups, and it's impressive to look at those names on the cup and refresh your mind once in a while.
One guy that maybe, Mike, maybe you could speak to. We just last year, of course, was the anniversary of the 30-year anniversary of the first cup. And in talking to some of the players, Ron Francis and some guys, especially one of your old broadcast mate, the 2-9er, one name that does come up was John Cullen. And obviously Cullen did not get his name on the cup. Yeah. But those guys were saying that he was one of those guys, if he wasn't playing as well as he was in that season, 90-91 season, they might not have been able to make the trade that they made.
Oh, I agree. And I'll tell you, that was a lot harder trade than people remember. I mean, a lot of people, there was a lot of shock about that trade and the Penguins not being able to make good with it. But, I mean, obviously it turned out for the better for the Penguins as a team. But certainly Johnny Cullen, it would be right there front and center. And forgive me for not remembering that, but certainly he contributed so much. I mean, he basically that year for the first half of it was the Penguins. I mean, he did everything with what he did, and that's why it was valuable to Hartford because they were looking for a guy, to carry them. And Ronnie Francis had fallen out of favor with the owner there, or for some strange reason, and they wanted him to be moved. And the Penguins had an opportunity to pick him up. And Craig Patrick, to his credit, made the deal. And all those guys that came here all contributed.
Mike, as we record this for this coming weekend, The big story in Pittsburgh is likely Ben Roethlisberger's last game as a Steeler in Pittsburgh. The last time that they went from a Hall of Fame quarterback, it took them about 20 years to get to Ben Roethlisberger, from Bradshaw to Roethlisberger. The Pittsburgh Penguins, when Mario Lemieux is getting ready to retire finally for the last time, here comes Sidney Crosby. And we've talked about this on the show before, but I want to get your thoughts on just how this franchise was able to go from from Mario Lemieux to Sidney Crosby, two of the great top 10, maybe top 5 players of all time.
Well, you're missing a big one there too, 68.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So he's been, in my opinion, one of the top 10 players to ever play the game. So how blessed has this city been? Really, when you look at it, they have 5 cups, but they've had some pretty good people play here on a nightly basis. You can't ask for anything more. I don't know if you can ask for anything more, except the reincarnation of Mario's first grandson, who is apparently, or grandson, hopefully it is, to take over the franchise down the road. So, all of those people, when the Kingpin is from center ice too, working with Lemieux and Crosby, and Yager certainly. Just to have the caliber of player in your lineup night after night, I honestly feel that it gave the Penguins a 1-0 lead in every game that they played. So that's what they meant to this franchise.
Mikey, obviously there were the 5 cups that you saw this team win. You also saw a couple of heartbreaking losses in the playoffs. Is there one of those that kind of stands out to you that was really disappointing?
Well, I would say the Islander one in, is it 81 or 82? Davey, help me out.
That would have been 82, I believe. I think 81 was the Blues.
Yeah, 82. We lost to the Blues the year before, and in a 3-game matchup. And then we had the Islanders, the first team in the playoffs that year, on a 5-game set. And Davey remembers it, and the people of Pittsburgh do. The first 2 games of the series, the Islanders just smoked the Penguins. I mean, they drove them right out of the building. It was so bad that the owner of the team, Ed DeBartolo Sr., told the people for the games that were scheduled in Pittsburgh, come and get your money back. And he did. He not lying. Told him to come and get your money back. But the Penguins weren't done. And they won 2 games there. It was around Easter. And they had forced a 5th game. And that was going to be in New York. And the Penguins in that game led 3-1 in the 3rd period. John Tonelli took over, scored the tying goal, scored the game winner in overtime. And that one probably hurt me more than anything. They were right on the cusp of knocking off the champions, and they couldn't quite get it done. And I just remember sitting outside the locker room on the floor and just not saying a word. I was just so hurt inside that they lost that game. And that's never affected me any other time that I've been there. But I remember that game, David, more than any. And then somebody from the Islanders came by. The guy said, "Your guys played well." I didn't have the heart to even answer it. I just sat there. And by later that night, we were fine. But that was a disappointing loss for the Pittsburgh Penguins.
And Mikey, we'll save the toughest question for last here, because I know it's a long list you're going to be picking from. What was your favorite documentary about a mosquito statue in Manitoba that you watched in a press room at Le Colisée in Quebec?
Well, the thing that stood out to me more than anything, we, Mr. Molinari and myself, Tom, asked the people in the press room, and they were so good to us, weren't they, Davey?
Yes, they certainly were.
Just asked them if we could, this is there to speak French, pretty much all French. If we could change the channel to, I think it was an NFL playoff game.
I think it might have been an NCAA basketball tournament game, I believe.
We asked them because we were looking at this and we couldn't understand what it was about. And they said, "Oh, no. So there's Davey and myself partaking in a after game drink and watching this documentary the statue in the city in Manitoba and how big it is and how people come from miles around to see this giant mosquito statue. One we will never forget, David. And one that is still talked about. You can look it up online, folks. You can find out where is the biggest statue of a mosquito, and they'll direct you right to Manitoba.
Well, Mike, we thank you so much for your time, and certainly I'll just say it for all the Penguin fans that listen to us. Thank you for all the great years you have provided us, and whatever you're going to do here coming up, doing some little stuff for the radio, whatever contributions you make for the Penguins. I think everyone has appreciated your work over the year. We hope you really enjoy your retirement. My goodness, it's been well earned.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Dave. You know, I could go through a whole list of things. I can tell you to keep smiling like a butcher's dog, but I'll just end by saying Lange has left the building.
There's no segue for that. From the great Mike Lange, with the great Dave Molinari, this is Tom Reed, and that's this week's edition of the 66 to 87 podcast. Good luck to the guest who has to follow that next week. See you next week, folks.